The 2024 NFL trade deadline day is today, and the Chargers have a huge decision to make. And at 5-3 and a great chance at the playoffs, we think they should absolutely be buyers.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together now for 9 seasons, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. To make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free in the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
I think, Daniel, when Chargers fans knew that Jim Harbaugh was going to be the coach, that they had some high hopes that the Chargers were going to be able to be good right away. I don't know if they expected them to be where they're at right now, where I feel like they should definitely be buyers. They should go out and add more talent and add to their ability to go make the playoffs. And for Quentin Johnston, is this a real situation that we should believe in? Is he really having a resurgent or a big-time second year? There's some people out there that are not so sure.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think you could say, obviously last week broken coverage. Maybe there's a little bit more there, but it's hard to doubt that he's made a major improvement from year 1 to year 2. But today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. David, it is Buy or Sell Tuesday, getting into the biggest Charger storylines and overreactions. And today is the day for all of that, because right now the Chargers have to make a decision on if they want to be buying at the trade deadline, because at 4 p.m. Eastern time today, they're not going to be able to add any other player to this roster via trade. That means they have to make a decision, and at 5-3, with a very winnable game coming up against the Tennessee Titans, I think you can, obviously you can't look over it, but there's a great chance this team is 6-3 going into a very tough stretch. And I do think that within reason, the Chargers should be buyers. And I don't think necessarily they should be sending, day 1 or 2 picks away and making all-in moves, but that's the kind of nice thing about where the Chargers are at right now. This is year 1 of the Jim Harbaugh, era. That they're trying to build something that is going to last more than 1 year. There's no kind of impetus to go all in, right? Or have to kind of jeopardize your future to go and win this season. Yet you have a good shot at making the playoffs. All you really want is at this point and this year with this team to give yourself a chance to get to the dance and see what happens. And I think the other thing is too, David, maybe the most important thing for me is it's hard to repeat defense from year to year, right? Just because you're a great defense 1 year doesn't mean you're a great defense the next. Look at the Ravens, right? And what they've been this year after losing Mike McDonald. Who knows what's going to happen with Jesse Minter? Right now, you have a great defense. So I do think you should be doing what you can, especially on the offensive side, to see if you can't make a couple of, mid-tier type of moves potentially to get you over the hump and make you a legitimate playoff team.
Yeah, I'm buying the fact that they should be buyers. The Chargers definitely should be aggressive in adding to their offense, which I think is obviously, the biggest area of opportunity for their team. I mean, you look at it right now, according to ESPN, the Chargers have a 78% chance to make it to the playoffs at 5-3 right now. Obviously, there's 9 more games left on the schedule, but they're put themselves in a big spot. We told you how big that Browns game was last week as far as your percentage to go to the playoffs versus not go. It was big, and it really put themselves in a good position. But they should be looking to add, because I talked about the offense. This puts it in perspective right here. The Chargers have scored 4 second-half touchdowns in 8 games. Okay, it's been absolutely atrocious. It's really, really bad.
Well, 3 of those are what, from the last game, or the last 2 games?
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. The week 1 touchdown with Ladd McConkey against the Raiders, and then the last few weeks has been the entirety of them scoring touchdowns in the second half this season. So the Chargers need to go add more weapons. They need to go add more firepower so that they can sustain more offensive drives and not get so lost in the second half of games.
I think the other argument for it is this. This is a year where there's kind of an abnormal amount of really bad teams, right? Right now there are 8 teams that have 2 wins or less. The Saints, Panthers, Patriots, Dolphins, Raiders, Browns, Titans, and Jaguars.
A lot of those
doesn't mean And it doesn't mean all of those teams are going to be sellers, right? And it doesn't mean that there, nobody, or like that there aren't people who are off limits on those teams. Like, of course, everyone's going to check in on your best players. And a lot of these cases with young quarterbacks or whatever the case may be, they're probably not going to want to get rid of those guys who could be kind of foundational pieces. So there are a lot of bad teams. The Chargers are probably going to have a bunch of compensatory picks over the next few years. So for me, hey, if you have day 3 picks that you can move to go help your team this year without jeopardizing your future, absolutely do it. And if you stand pat, you kind of have the team you thought you were going to have anyways, and a team that was already kind of on the trajectory of making the playoffs while not really being a true Super Bowl contender. I don't think there's really anyone that can move the needle as far as them being a Super Bowl team this year, but get yourself to the dance, and there's definitely guys on all of those teams that could help you out in getting there. This is what Jim Harbaugh had to say about it on the Colin Cowherd show. He said, do they need receiver? Basically talking about what he hears people saying. Do they need receiver help, perimeter help? No, we don't need that. I can't think of a position right now where we need to upgrade. I love the guys that are here, love them. But if Joe wants somebody and can make us better, then I know he will. All competitors are welcome. Competitors welcome on the 2024 Los Angeles Chargers. I know David Summer saying, hey, pretty emphasized, we don't need receiver help. But I also just think that you kind of have to say that. Like, that is what you have to say in that moment.
You definitely have to say that. There's no way he's going to go out there and inadvertently or, on purpose throw any of his players under the bus talking to the media. That's just not going to happen. He's not going to go out there and say, well, I think we can upgrade our interior offensive line. I don't think those guys haven't played that well. Or,
Sure.
Hey, our cornerbacks, man, we've got some great play out of the rookies, but we can't really depend on, he can't do that, and also, why are you going to give away the plan? They're definitely not going to, say anything about who they're talking to, any conversations they've had, players they're looking for. That's just not going to happen. But whether they are or whether they're not, it's a very political answer from the coach. It's what you expect. And so I don't know if we can read too much into what he's saying there.
Yeah, and I understand that he specifically brings up the wide receivers, which a lot of people, especially on social media, have brought up. At the same time, I think there are other positions where it'll be easy to add bodies. Obviously, the Chargers are getting DJ Chark, and I don't think that means, hey, your offense is fixed because of that. But hopefully it's better, and they do have some reinforcements in that way. I think he's also just preparing his team for if they don't make a move, he still believes in them the same amount, which I think is what the message was there. But I think the end of that where he's saying, hey, all competitors are welcome, I think that's telling too. And I also think that it's hard to believe that he wouldn't know if there was something potentially in the works saying he's the, Batman or the Robin to Joe Ortiz's Batman. But David, obviously, when you look at it and you think about why would they, really need to, and he's saying, I don't see any positions they could upgrade. I do, David. Whether it's the depth or the starting talent, there are several positions where the Chargers could absolutely upgrade this roster at the deadline today.
Yeah, Jim Harbaugh can't say anything, but we definitely can. And so tight end obviously is a position that I feel like they should be looking at to upgrade.
Maybe the most likely too. I feel like tight end for me, just with the amount of wide receivers they have, it feels to me maybe like tight end's the most likely position they have.
Especially at this point, after who's available, who's hurt. Just the players that are out there, tight end might be where they look at. I think interior offensive line, obviously, if there's any opportunity. We know Brandon Sheriff apparently is on the block. So, hey, I would love that. Go out there and make that move. Go bring him in. He's still a great pass protector. We've talked about him on the show. And then, hey, edge, corner, I think you can always add to those position groups. I know your defense has been great, and, the rookies have played out of their mind. But if there's somebody available, like a Marshawn Lattimore, for example, why not go out there and try to make your team better and go try to add strength to strength? We saw what that happened, or when they did that with the edge room. I think it's not a bad strategy.
Yeah, and I know everyone wants a wide receiver. I don't think it's hard to imagine who that'd be right now. And if it is, I think it's a very mid-tier to lower tier type of a player. But and at that point, who are you adding them over in that wide receiver room? If you were going to go for a wide receiver one, there's only one that you could probably even argue is that guy, and that's probably T. Higgins. But the Bengals are right in the chase now in the AFC, right, with big games ahead of them, kind of to get back into it. So Darius Slayton's the guy we talked about. I think he's banged up right now anyway, so I don't know if that would happen. There's just not a lot out there, but it doesn't mean there aren't positions where they couldn't get big upgrades that could give them a much better chance of turning one of these games, right? One of these guys making a play in one of these crucial games they have coming up against really good teams. That might be the difference of them making the playoffs or not this year. So we're going to find out, and we will be back with you potentially with a live show tonight to talk about any trades that do end up happening, we will know. And it's hard to believe that Joe Ortiz isn't in there trying to make something happen right now. But another great thing that I heard on Monday was Jim Harbaugh sticking up for his quarterback. And I don't think Justin Herbert has ever had anyone who's as down, as ride or die for him as Jim Harbaugh is, and he's tired of the hits that he's been taking without getting the call. So we're going to talk about that and more Chargers buy or sells on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, I need to tell you guys about GameTime, because GameTime is where you can get the tickets for the best price. And if you're going to any kind of event, like potentially a Chargers game, you want to know that you're getting the best price. And the good thing about GameTime is they now have a new feature called GameTime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. GameTime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And I brought up this weekend's upcoming game against the Titans, and you can get into this game for $21. If you want a game that you can go to, feel pretty good about the Chargers' chances, and just really enjoy a great stadium, I mean, $21 is definitely worth it. I also saw just on the GameTime Picks, one of the best deals I thought is the 300 section, first row. You can get tickets for $137. Great seats, because you can also see a panoramic view of exactly what your view is going to be. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime Picks. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. But again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today. What time is it? Game time. I also need to tell you guys to get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. It's always going to make me nervous, David, when the Chargers are huge favorites, and they're going to enter this game at home against the Titans, at least as of right now, as 8.5-point favorites. This is a game they should win by 10 plus. But if you're not feeling great about that huge spread, the good news is we can now bet on anytime touchdown scorers again, because the Chargers are scoring touchdowns. So get ready to do that and just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. David, we have more Chargers buy or sells to getting into the biggest Chargers storylines and overreactions. And I think especially around a trade deadline, there's a lot going on. But one of the things that I wanted to get to today, just because of what Jim Harbaugh had to say at his press conference, was him protecting his quarterback and calling for the protection of his quarterback in a big way. So Jim Harbaugh, on a press conference today, was talking about Justin Herbert and the hits that he's taking, just as he usually does, how amazing Justin Herbert is. And he basically ended up coming out and saying, hey, he's not getting the calls that he needs to get. So the buy or sell is this: no one has ever had Justin Herbert's back the way Jim Harbaugh has Justin Herbert's back. Are you buying or selling that?
I'm happy to buy this one, and this one stems from the very first time we heard any connection between the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh was when somebody went on a radio station and talked about how they talked to Jim Harbaugh at a funeral. And the only thing that they were talking about,
from Get Up, ESPN.
Yes, and they were just talking about how much he absolutely was raving about Justin Herbert and loved everything about him. Well, that hasn't changed. He has spoken glowingly about Justin on multiple occasions. He said that there's not one single thing that he wouldn't trade of Justin's for his. Jim Harbaugh absolutely loves himself some Justin Herbert. Go get yourself someone who talks about you like Jim Harbaugh talks about Justin Herbert.
Yeah, man, it just feels cool to watch your head coach go to bat for your quarterback like that. Basically, there was a long back and forth about how Justin Herbert is just so big and strong and how tough he is, and he called him, in his book, the toughest quarterback in NFL history. He said he used to have himself as #1 on that list, but Justin Herbert has supplanted him as the toughest quarterback in NFL history, at least in Jim Harbaugh's record book. But this is from Daniel Popper. Justin Herbert has had the 9th most roughing the passer calls accepted against him since 2020. So you're like, okay, he's top 10 as far as getting calls. It seems like he's getting calls. The problem is also per Popper, 8 of those 13 came his rookie seasons. That means there's only been 5 from 2021 in every game we played in 2024. And Jim Harbaugh's 100% right.
Oh, yeah.
He brought up Shaq because he didn't have it right, because he kept saying hack a Shaq, but that's just when they would intentionally foul him to make him shoot free throws because he was so terrible at free throws.
Yeah.
But what Popper is basically trying to say, hey, I know what you mean. And what he meant is this: Shaq didn't get the calls other guys got. LeBron, it's
yeah.
kind of the same thing. When you're bigger and stronger than everyone else and them hitting you doesn't affect
get treated
you as
differently.
much as when other guys get hit. You don't get those calls.
No.
And that is the case with Justin Herbert. He does get hit in the head. He does have dudes land on him.
Heck
and I
yeah.
think because he's so damn big and he doesn't always seem like it affects him as much,
Well,
he
and you
doesn't,
see him
he doesn't
knock
get those
out
calls.
Matthew on the sidelines as well.
Well, sure,
like,
but this
you
is
know.
just about him dropping back and getting roughing the passer calls,
Yeah.
right? Like, obviously, Jim Harbaugh does bring up a time where he's stepping out of bounds and
every
he
game.
gets hit. That's unnecessary roughness. That's a little bit different.
Yeah.
As far as roughing the passer goes, he doesn't get those calls. Guys land on him. Guys hit him in the head all the time, but he doesn't flinch. He doesn't get moved the way other guys do, and he doesn't get those calls. The same thing happened to Cam Newton back in the day. Those guys are pretty similar as far as size. Both of those guys, gigantic.
Yeah.
But it's just awesome. I mean, Jim Harbaugh, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he gets fined for that. And I'm glad that he was willing to go to bat, even knowing that was probably going to be the case. And finally, at one point, he's just like, I'm just going to say he's not getting the calls. And he's not. So hopefully, hey, if this gets them 1 or 2 more calls for the rest of the season in a big moment,
Money well spent.
you need to make sure your quarterback's protected. This is how you do it. And he didn't get that from Anthony Lynn. He didn't get that from Brandon Staley. But Athir called in, and he has a thing about Quentin Johnston, and he thinks he knows exactly why Quentin Johnston has been so much better in year 2.
Dan, David, this is it to you. I love you. I have a bio show Tuesday. QJ having a breakout year because of Jim Harbaugh effect and Sanjay Lal. I'm buying it. What do you think? Thank you. Love you.
I love you, Athir. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to give credit to Sanjay Lal, who obviously did great work with DK Metcalf. That was kind of his calling card, and DK Metcalf, from where he started, is a much better receiver now than he was early on. I think a lot of people get credit for it, right? I think Jim Harbaugh and then the new culture and the buy-in that they're getting from Quentin Johnston, has a lot to do with it. I think that Sanjay Lal and his specific one-on-one work with him has made him take, big improvements, or he's made large leaps as far as his technique and things like that this season. And I also think Greg Roman gets a lot of credit too, because I think one of the bigger things is that they're just using him a lot better schematically, David. But he has 6 games this year, 18 catches, 282 yards, 15.7 yards per catch, and 4 touchdowns. Last year, 17 games, 38 catches, 431 yards, only 11.3 yards per catch, and 2 touchdowns. He's already doubled his touchdowns from last season. Last year, he averaged 25.4 yards per game. This year, he's averaging 47. So he's almost doubling how many yards per game he's getting. A lot of that's buoyed by a 66-yard broken coverage touchdown, obviously, but I do think there are a lot of people that get credit, and I think you have to credit himself as well for putting the work in.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is, there's a little bit of everybody who deserves credit. I mean, it's definitely Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman for using him better. It's Sanjay Lal for coaching him better. And it's Quentin Johnston for playing better. It's all of those elements all together. It is the reasons why we are seeing a much better Quentin Johnston in year 2.
Absolutely. And I do think there are certain reasons where you might, potentially poo-poo it, as we have here with 80 Simons, who says, buy or sell, Quentin Johnston's resurgence is a total overreaction. 3 of his 4 touchdowns so far have been total defensive screw-ups. Man him up, and he disappears. David, let's think about the touchdowns first, okay, right? The best touchdown he's had this year was against J.C. Horn, one-on-one on the outside, deep ball, go route. He gets behind him. He comes back to the football, makes a big-time catch in a one-on-one situation. Nothing to question about that. That's a play that you didn't see him make at all as a rookie. You can see the improvements in his release and getting and stacking the defensive back, all of those things in that play. The other 3 touchdowns, though, I get what he's saying, right? One of them's a wide open touchdown in that same game against the Panthers, where it was more about the play call and opening things up and clearing out a path for him to get wide open. 66-yard broken play touchdown last week. And then you have the play against the Steelers, which, again, I don't think was a broken play, more just about good scheming. The Chargers ran a fake wide receiver screen where Quentin Johnston pretended to block, then he released, and he got a big touchdown against the Steelers. I think, maybe some of it's a little fluky, right? I said on yesterday's show, hey, 118 yards is nice. Obviously, 33 of those come on a play before the half where they're lateraling, right? And basically the only thing the Browns are trying to do is keep them out of the end zone. At the same time, I think it's probably a little too harsh to say, okay, well, there's no resurgence in Quentin Johnston. He's basically the same player and can still disappear.
Yeah, he's definitely not the same player, and I think the where I point to as the evidence that he's not is that last year, according to Next Gen Stats, he was only creating 2.4 yards of separation. Okay, so far in 2024, Quentin Johnston is generating 3.3 yards worth of separation. So it's almost an entire yard better than he was doing last year. So the releases, the routes, they're better. I mean, it's working. It has improved greatly. Yeah. Also, his yards after catch per reception is 6th highest in the NFL. It's at 8.5 yards after catch per reception. So he's a yak monster, and he's being put in situations to be that yak monster. And we've seen it. He's still extremely difficult to bring down. 149 of his 282 yards have come yards after the catch. That's a little over 50% of his receiving yards. So the Chargers know what they're doing, finally, with Quentin Johnston. It's put him in positions to get in open space and let him work. That's what they're doing. That's why he's having success.
Yeah, it's a lot better, but at the same time, there's a reason we wanted the Chargers to get help at wide receiver, right? Because there's a difference between much improved and being a wide receiver one or someone like that. So I don't know if he's ever going to be that all well-rounded, can do everything type of receiver, but we can tell he can be a good weapon if you know how to use him correctly, and that's a major improvement from what we saw in week 1. But we still have more buy or sells to get into, including if there is a fatal flaw on this Chargers roster that could potentially keep them out of the playoffs. And in a certain way, I'm buying that. So we're going to get into that and much more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. But I do need to tell you guys that today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. As we get closer to Thanksgiving, start thinking about what you're thankful for. And I feel especially grateful for my mom right now, and especially how helpful she's been with baby Dilly. And I think this is just a time where you can reflect and be grateful for those things, because this month is all about gratitude. And along with the person I just shouted out, there's another person we don't think enough, and that's ourselves. It's sometimes hard to remind ourselves that we are trying our best to make sense of everything in this crazy world, and that isn't easy. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try, because if you have a therapist, a lot of times one of the things they can help you do is not only not be so hard on yourself, but realize you should appreciate yourself too. I mean, me and David both work multiple jobs. It's easy to get caught up in the grind and not kind of appreciate all the hard work that you put in. Having therapy can help with that, and you can let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. Dave, we have more buy or sells to get into, but I wanted to thank everyone, especially on this trade deadline mania as things get closer, for making us your first listen. We always appreciate you guys. If you need a second listen, make sure to check out the new slate at Locked On NFL as they react to all the crazy trades I'm sure we're going to see as the day unfolds. And they have a new slate with 2 shows a day, in the morning with the Madman Tyler Rowland, and later on kicking back with my boy Tony Wiggins in the barbershop as they bring on the local experts who cover their team every day on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. Let's get to this buy or sell, though, here, David, from John Clark, who says, buy or sell, the Chargers' interior offensive line is their fatal flaw and the position group that will keep this team from making the playoffs this year. That's a bold one, David. Are you buying or selling it?
Yeah, so I'm selling that it's going to keep them out of the playoffs. I don't think that that's going to happen. I am buying that it is their most fatal flaw, though. I think that's an obvious statement for me. And when you look at the numbers, it's just not good. I mean, 10 sacks, 49 pressures allowed by Zion Johnson, Bradley Bozeman, Trey Pipkins, and Jamari Sawyer whenever he's played in there. Those are just horrendous numbers. And I think, it's been very obvious to see what their issues have been on the inside.
Yeah.
They just have not been able to identify or pick up stunts or twists. And it has been every single game that they've had these struggles and these issues. And the defense and the opposing defenses know it. They're exposing the Chargers.
Yeah. So I think I'd probably go along the same lines as far as I think the Chargers could still be a playoff team. Even if they don't make a move on the interior of the offensive line, I think they can still be a playoff team. And I think they've showed that, even though they're flawed, having a great quarterback, having an elite defense, having good coaching can do a lot to make up for some of it. Yet, at the same time, David, I would buy 100% that if the Chargers do not make the playoffs, it's in large part because of the fact that their interior offensive line is so poor, right?
Yes.
I watched on Monday Night Football Chris Jones go up against Vita Vea. You have both those guys still on your schedule this year. That is terrifying. It's going to make me lose sleep tonight, because with the way that group is playing right now, how could you feel decent that either of those guys couldn't just totally derail your offensive game plan? Because if you can't block up the middle, it makes everything so much tougher. And when you're talking about pass protecting, out of 129 centers and guards with at least 100 blocking snaps this year, Zion Johnson ranks 105th in pass protection, Pipkins 112th, Bozeman 118th, right? We're talking about the 80th percentile or worse, and that's all three of your starters. So the proof is in the pudding to some extent with this group. And I think it's what brings up this buy or sell we have here from Shamelessly Positive Ryan, who says this, maybe in a worried fashion, which is the way I'd be saying it, which is buy or sell. The Chargers can fix their O-line protection woes without making a trade this season. David, to go back to what you were saying about the stunts and the twists and the games that we're seeing work so often and so consistently against the Chargers, I have to sell this because even though I know it's something that by NFL terms is pretty simple fix, right? Like one adjustment, right? Fixing one thing, stopping one thing could make this offensive line so much better. Yet we're 8 games into the season, and I just don't know how to have faith that it's going to happen without some sort of addition or something changing in that room.
Yeah, I mean, I'm agreeing with you as well. I am selling it because at this point in time, they kind of are who they are. They are who they've shown us to be, so
they are who we thought they were.
Exactly. At this point in time, also, there's not a lot of time to fix these issues in practice because these game plans are so specific to each individual contest. The time to work on those issues was in the summertime. It's not time for that anymore. Every single game is so crucial, so important. You have to focus all of your efforts and energy on winning that next contest.
Yeah, and I think the hard thing is you just don't necessarily feel like there's anyone behind these guys as far as depth goes that you'd feel like is a major upgrade. Like we know Jamari Sawyer's not the answer on the inside at guard. They told us how they felt about Jordan McFadden when they started Sam Mustipher in a game next to Bradley Bozeman and had him play guard instead of not only Jordan McFadden, but Brendan Hymus as well, right? They could have started Brendan Hymus at center and pushed Bradley Bozeman out to guard, a position he's played before. They didn't do that. So they've kind of already told you how they feel about the guys in those rooms. In that game, when they were missing those guys in the games where they've been missing their tackles, all of those problems become amplified. The hardest thing to swallow, David, is last week, what's the excuse? You have every guy out there. I think maybe one of them was on the injury report. Maybe. All of them might have been clear of the injury report.
Yeah.
And it still was the most sacks they've given up all season. So it's hard to have faith that they can fix it with the guys they currently have, which is why it's like, yeah, of course, if you can bring an improvement in at this trade deadline today, you do it. At the same time, you just don't see those moves happen very often for starting offensive linemen. So let's get to this last buy or sell here from John in Anaheim, who has a voicemail about Gus the Bus Edwards and him potentially coming back and fixing the Chargers running game.
Hey guys, this is John in Anaheim. Just wanted to give you guys a buy or sell, and thank you for your service. Drogemeyer, appreciate it. Buy or sell, the Chargers missed Gus Edwards in the running game. His first 2 games we had great running game, and then since then it hasn't been the same ever since he got reduced carries and then started being out. So I think they miss him as a batting ram. What do you guys think? Thank you.
David, it's interesting. Are you buying or selling that?
I'm going to sell it. Unfortunately for Gus Edwards and for the Chargers, Gus Edwards hasn't really done much of anything. So there hasn't really been much to miss. And honestly, I'm of the believer that he's never been right. Honestly, there's something that's been bothering him, and it's pretty obvious when you look at the numbers to me. 38 carries for 113 yards, 3 yards per carry. But here's the big issue for me. Only 1 forced missed tackle.
Yeah.
1. And he had at least 18 forced missed tackles in his previous 5 seasons. So
in
to
each
me,
of those seasons, right? You're saying
there is something that's not right there. I mean, and hopefully after he comes off of IR, whenever that is, he's ready to go. He's 100%. He's rested, and he can go be the Gus Edwards we've seen in the past. Because unfortunately, up to this point, he has not shown up in lightning bolts.
Yeah, and I think I would have to probably sell it too. I see both sides of this to the extent of I think maybe they wish they had the version of him they thought they were signing, not necessarily the version that they got of him, right? I think the style of play that he brings, that physical running, that getting the tough yardage type of play could help the Chargers right now. It just wasn't exactly what we're seeing. Now, Could they use him as a battering ram? And did it feel like that worked, week 1 against the Raiders where it seemed like they wore them down in the fourth quarter? They ran all over them. Similar last week where the things finally started kind of breaking open towards the end of the game. Yeah, there's probably something to that. But the problem is now the Chargers have gone to a much more pass-heavy system where it's like, I don't know if I want Gus Edwards running his head into a wall 15 to 18 times a game just to hope that you're going to wear down the other side. Especially at the expense of J.K. Dobbins' carry, which, like we talked about yesterday, hey, it might be tough. He might have 15 carries for 30 yards at one point, but on the 16th carry, he could take it 63 yards to the house. And now all of a sudden it's 16 carries for 90 yards, right? Like that's how quick it can happen with J.K. Dobbins. So
True.
At least when you're putting, feeding J.K. Dobbins, you're like, hey, any one of these could break. I do think, that there have been a lot of just not necessarily just negative runs, but also just runs for no gain. Yeah, it would be nice to know, hey, on first down, if you're going to be committed to running it, maybe Gus Edwards can get you just those tough 3 yards, even if he's never going to get you the 20 yards. But I think more to your point, hopefully, if he does come back, because we have no idea what the severity is, or if they have any inclination that he will be back at all this season, you hope he's right and looks more like the version we saw that was pretty awesome in Baltimore last year. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. It's trade deadline day. We will be back with you guys tomorrow. We might even be back with you tonight with a live show if the Chargers make something happen. So make sure you follow me at Dan Talk Sports and David Drogemeyer at Dro Talk SD. As throughout the day, we're reacting to everything that goes on around the trade deadline, which is at 4 p.m. Eastern today. So to make sure you guys also don't miss the next show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. You can also find us on Twitter and the show's page at Locked On LAC, where we might put out a mailbag post tomorrow to see how everyone's feeling about the Chargers either making a trade or not making a trade. You guys can hit us up there or call into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. You can also find the show every day at Locked On Chargers on Instagram and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. But I think Joe Ortiz can make something happen. I know he's going to have his finger on the pulse. He's going to be on the phone seeing if the right deal was there to be made. And I think we have to trust whatever the process looks like at this point with this new regime. But at least you have faith that there's a guy that can actually pull the trigger if the right deal comes up. So we'll be back with you guys to react to anything that happens today. But until tomorrow, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.